No problem. All right, so we just had Brian on the podcast. Brian's got a Instagram page called Food Lies, and then he's been working on a documentary. So, and then he invited me to speak in an event in Austin that was kind of a, what would you characterize that event as?
We disguised it as a immune system awareness rally. It was really a freedom rally, and about taking health into your own hands. So.
Yeah, so the big thing and what I connected with Brian is about personal responsibility, and that and I think what I was telling him, he's like, the crowd looks pretty fit. I'm like, yeah, no, these guys are tip of the spear. Like, you guys have heard, for you, those of you guys that followed us since CrossFit Football, dude, Chris was at our one in Oakland when Rob got up and spoke, the fifth one. What's really cool is you see this kind of changing the guard, where a lot of what he was talking about, I was like, you should have been there about 10 years ago when Rob was really in these fights. So it's been really cool. He's doing a documentary, and I just figured it'd be fun if we could just do a little Q&A, and more importantly, have him tell his story about how he got here, and more importantly, the work that he's doing in terms of trying to expose people to, and it's kind of funny, I'm sure for him, he goes and talks to people where it blows their minds. For you guys, you're gonna be like, yeah, what the fuck are y'all talking about? But I thought it was a great story. If you guys, did any of you guys listen to the podcast we did with him? Cool. All right, so yeah, let's start it. So let's get a little origin story.
Wow, yeah. Well, I'm from Hawaii. I grew up, we were eating the food pyramid. My family was just like, hey, rice and pasta and low-fat this and low-fat that. And it really caught up to them quickly. So I've never ate out a lot. It was a big treat to go out to eat. So a lot of people just blame these ill health problems on fast food. It's like, well, we didn't eat a lot of fast food. And so I'll just jump ahead. I lost both of my parents at 30 years old. I'm 38 now. So that was a wake-up call, especially since we were doing all the right things, right? And they weren't obese or anything. They were just like the standard American. Everyone's like, oh, dad bod, that's so funny. Like, he's a dad bod. I'm like, no, that's not cool. Like, that belly is telling you that you're not healthy.
What did your parents pass away from?
Cancer and Alzheimer's.
How old were they?
They're both in their 70s. So they're a little older than normal parents. Like, I was 30, they were 70, but these things are not like just normal. We think they're normal because it's typical, but it shouldn't be normal. And so then that's what I learned, is that cancer and Alzheimer's, a lot of people think that it's more genetic. They're like, oh, okay, well, that just runs in your family. And what I found is that's absolutely not true. And that humans are not, I just went to Africa and saw humans. I hung out with a lady who was 120 years old. She was dancing, she was going nuts, Like, this is not normal for people to just die. So people know that type 2 diabetes and obesity have to do with diet, right? So some things people know they're to do with diet. But what I'm finding, and many people are finding out, but not in the mainstream, is that stuff like Alzheimer's, cancer, all these other things are directly related to diet and lifestyle. And so we just need to recognize that. So that's kind of my beginning story, is that I just was woken up. I couldn't eat whatever I wanted to anymore at 30. I was like, oh, wait a second. And I made a few changes, and my whole body composition changed since then, and my health changed. And yeah, I don't get sick anymore. I don't have allergies anymore. I don't have joint pain. Like, all these things just went away, but I was always fit. So this is a big message for me, like, or your clients. A lot of people think they're fine. They think they're fit. They're like, yeah, I have abs, but that doesn't mean you're fit, or it doesn't mean you're healthy. That, there's another level out there.
So how did you get started on the project for the documentary?
Well, I grew up doing film stuff, and it kind of just came back around when I saw What the Health. Did anyone see What the Health? The stupid vegan film, and now they have the Game Changers. So I remember 4 years ago in the summer, I saw What the Health, and I just was so mad because I was in the thick of things, of like learning everything all over again about nutrition, and I just said, someone has to combat this. This is stupid.
So where have you gone? What have you done? You said you were just down in Africa interviewing people. I'm just wondering about what's the journey that the documentary's taken you on?
Yeah, it's a long, slow road when you're doing it by yourself. We don't have funders. You know, James Cameron has all his money and gets Arnold Schwarzenegger to.
Well, he's got his pea protein.
He's got his pea protein money. You know, he's got to make some ROI on that investment. $140 million. He's got to sell some pea protein. I got nothing to sell. I didn't have anything to sell, but then I started selling meat, actually. But I started with Sean Baker. If you guys know Sean Baker, carnivore guy, I interviewed him the day before he went on Joe Rogan's podcast 3 years ago. So I got him before he was cool. And yeah, that's how it started off. It was just me and some guy, like some filmer guy I found online, and we showed up and interviewed him. And it kind of just kept snowballing from there, and the project just gained a lot of momentum since.
What do you think about the carnivore stuff? I mean, it seems a little, I mean, to me at least, it's a little extreme, like the fact that, you know, you end up being kind of so metabolically broken that the only food you can consume is red meat. You know, we talked about like metabolic flexibility in that. So I don't know, like I was on his podcast and I don't know, like the jury's still out for me with that one.
It's interesting. I don't think he does it completely anymore. I think he joked around about eating ice cream at his son's birthday one time to me.
And people lost their minds.
I didn't tell anyone until now. I don't know if this is a secret. Don't tell anyone.
I just call that like the rich white guy, I want to eat ribeye from Costco for every meal diet, which is totally cool. If you just want to like go buy Costco fillets and ribeyes and that's all you want to eat, then just say, hey, fucking, I'm an adult. I want to eat ribeyes and Costco ribeyes for every meal.
Well, it's kind of like a lazy man's diet too. It's a rich white lazy guy's diet. Yeah. It's like, I just don't want to cook anything else.
I'm just going to barbecue everything, which I'm not really upset at. I'm not angry.
Yeah.
I just want to throw like maybe some salad in or maybe mix up, you know, some other
something. Yeah. So I have mixed feelings about it. I think it's super effective for short periods of time. And I think that's what it is supposed to be. And then some of these guys just make it into an entire lifestyle. And I don't know. I've had debates. I had Mark Sisson, Sean Baker, and Dr. Paul Saladino in the studio, and we did a debate. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a great conclusion, but it just seems like it's better for short term.
What was the context of the debate?
Well, part of it too is, should we eat organ meats and nose and tail, or should we just eat muscle meat? Part of it is just carnivore in general. And yeah, Mark Sisson's kind of coming around. He used to be into, you know, just big ass salads or whatever he was trying to promote. But he's kind of heading that direction too.
Well, he's got a lot of bitch and salad dressings.
Yeah.
So the Primal Kitchen sold for big money. So, I mean, he's got to be like, I'm a fucking salad guy now.
He was easing back on the salad talk, though. Yeah. In that discussion, he was saying, you know, I'm finding that maybe it's not super necessary to fill up your diet with tons and tons of the salads. But yeah, it was more just a discussion, really. I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of variations. Now people are doing meats and sweets. Has anyone heard of meats and sweets? That's a new one.
What is that?
So it's like carnivore plus fruit, or like carnivore plus honey and fruit and stuff. So some of these guys are getting into that. And
so basically what they're doing is they're moving towards what we call the non-crazy person approach. I'm gonna eat some animal proteins, I'm probably gonna eat some vegetables, and if I go to a birthday party, I'll probably have some ice cream.
Kind of.
And I'm not gonna eat like an asshole.
That's kind of what it is.
All right,
well, it comes full circle, and I've kind of come full circle too, because I've spent many years on this, and I just look at research. I go to conferences, I talk to scientists and doctors, and I've kind of been all over the place. But I kind of get what some people are on this journey, where they go extreme, and then they come back to just a sensible approach, kind of what you're saying. But it's like people have to get there, and then they come here, and that's what I found is there's certain things to avoid, and then there's certain things to keep in. And you're right, it's just animal foods and some other whole foods and vegetables. It could be potatoes, it could be even white rice. A lot of people, you know, like vertical diet or something, right? Get some white rice. That's fine if you're working out, and some fruit and some honey. So it's like it took people like on this whole journey to go through carnivore, and they got all obsessed with it, and then they realized, oh, you know, like Paul Saladino's, he had some problems with electrolytes or just not getting enough of certain things. And he was so zealous about the carnivore diet. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh yeah, but let's eat fruit now. You know, it's like, and then I'm like, yeah, I know. I was like trying to say that this is just there is a sapient approach, which is what I'm calling it, is that we can just do a diet that's heavy in animal foods Of course, that's great. That's what humans have probably always done. But don't get extreme about it. Don't get dogmatic about it. That's why I like that Sean Baker said he ate ice cream.
Yeah, when I was on his podcast, there was a lot of what's the right word? Like a lot of hearsay. It was a lot of like anecdotal stuff.
Yeah.
And it just, and then I don't know if you guys heard the podcast I was on. It was also kind of weird in that he asked me a question and then he would mute me, and then he turned and he was obviously working on his computer. So at that point, if you're gonna pretty much put me on mute, I'm gonna go fucking ham. You guys know me, and I'll just talk shit to you. And I did. And the dude didn't even notice. And I'm like, you're not even looking at me right now. This is amazing. And I think like all this stuff kind of goes back. Like everybody knows about what's right. And the problem is for nutrition, it's very similar to religion. The more extreme it is, the easier it is to get people grouped in it. So you're like, you know what, we're going to eat no meat. We're only going to eat vegetables. Okay. Let me get these people on this side. No. Fuck the vegetables. We're going to go over here and we're going to create factions. And it's easier to put people out on those rails because people love extremes, and it allows them to control this stuff. But what have we talked about, right? What's the least non-crazy person approach? And if you can kind of lock that in, and I think what I appreciated about Brian, at least in our talk, was like, went on this journey and realized that like, there's a whole other level of component to this. What people think is healthy isn't necessarily healthy, and really what the media is portraying is healthy, and you guys know this. Like you hear this stuff come out and you're like, this sounds like bullshit. It's like my favorite is lab-grown meat. Has anybody here been like, ooh, I can't wait to get a hold of that lab-grown meat? No, that sounds awful. Or like, oh, we have the better than meat burger. And you're like, well, can I just get the burger? You keep the better? Like, who's fucking excited about better? Like, there's nobody. Even the people that claim you like that, they don't like it. And I tried it. It tastes awful. It literally, they're like, no, it tastes just like meat. I'm like, no, it doesn't. I know what meat tastes like. This is a terrible fucking option. And, and then the next pitch is, it's healthier. And you're like, no, it's not healthier. And then the next pitch, and then the next pivot is what? It's more ethical. And you're like, no, it's not. The most ethical diet is one of pasture-raised meat and probably a little farm that you have in your backyard. Why? We had there's a guy that follows Power Athlete. He's a farmer and rancher and it grows beans. And when we got into the vegan debate on Instagram, he chimed in. He's like, no, I have a couple hundred acres of bean fields. And he goes, the amount of dead animals that I have to pick out of the combine as we go, he goes, is epic. He goes, it's literally a bloodbath. He goes, because think about it. Everything from ground nesting birds to squirrels to deer to everything ends up in my big machine to pick all the beans. And he's like, if the vegans actually saw the amount of death that it takes to produce their food, he's like, I don't think they would want to eat it. But that's a misconception. So realistically, and I think, Mark Sisson and all these guys, they've, kind of gone in different directions, but it comes back to like maybe having some balance. It's kind of like in your training, right? Lift some weights, run a little bit, run short, run sprint, kind of mix it up. And, you can probably find a pretty good recipe with that.
I agree with that, yeah. I mean, that's why I say it's not sexy to just promote like a sensible diet, but it's the truth, I guess.
So, you're selecting the worst position to try to exploit and make money. You're selling a sensible, non-crazy person approach. That's never going to fucking be successful.
Gonna work. And you know what's not also going to work is making a documentary. That takes 4 years and you make no money. So I'm doing everything wrong.
Yeah,
I understand it.
You're all fucked up. You're all fucked up.
Maybe I'm just going for the long term.
What do you think? Like when I heard about the carnivore diet, the nose to tail made more sense to me. Just because when you look at like, and I remember sitting with Lauren Cordain years ago when I gave a talk before he kind of went off the deep end, he got a little wacky. He showed us these bitchin' pictures of like the settlers out hunting with American Indians, and there were like notations, like written words on the back of the pictures. And one of them was they shot this buffalo, and they called them the Injuns, went over and basically sliced open the buffalo and started consuming the organ meats to the point where like they, I think the guy said they like 4 or 5 pounds of organ meat, and then the picture were these dudes standing there with their guns, and then these American Indians that like whole faces and stomachs were covered in blood, and their guts were super distended. So these guys like realized like this isn't going to keep, and they literally cut them open, were consuming the organ meats right there, and they just stuffed themselves. and like it was a pretty bitchin' picture, and like realizing like they used every part of it. They used not only the hides, and every piece of the animal was used, and that was because nothing went to waste. So the fact that like I just so when I heard the carnivore thing, I'm like, so just ribeyes? It doesn't make sense. At least the nose to tail makes sense for me.
Well, yeah. So when I went to Africa, we would with the Hadza in Tanzania and the Maasai, well, also in Tanzania, but they're also in Kenya. And both groups, completely separate, right? Completely different traditions, no contact. They both had the exact same practice you're talking about. So as soon as we got there, the Hadza got a tik-tik, like this little deer. So they just opened it up for us, started cutting the liver and gave it to us. And we actually ate it. And usually, if they encounter other tourists, they're like, are you insane? Yeah. And I was like, oh, I'm ready. And same thing with Maasai.
I eat the liver, but not the kidneys. Anybody here ever had kidneys? Don't ever eat kidneys. Like you gotta like. So my mom would make them, and she would like soak them in milk to take the flavor out. So I got all these kidneys, and I threw them in the crock pot. And we were gonna get all primal and shit. It tastes like if somebody urinated all over your meat. It's absolutely awful. And I called my mom. I'm like, these doesn't taste like I remember. She's like, no, you got to soak them in milk for days, moron. I'm like, oh, all right. So you guys.
They did it just with the liver. Yeah, they did just the liver. We did that. So the Maasai, they killed a lamb for us. Same thing. Gave us the liver. It actually had parasites in it. We realized later.
Did you get sick?
I didn't. I took a lot of wormwood. You're supposed to take like wormwood. It helps get worms out.
Or ivermectin.
Ivermectin, yes, it's the same base. It's that yeah.
So you guys know ivermectin was invented in the 70s, passed the FDA in the 80s, and in 2015, ivermectin, the doctor won a Nobel Prize for ivermectin because it cured river blindness. So these guys in Africa, they were getting bit by these flies, and they get river blindness from a parasite. So ivermectin kills parasites. So when you see the stuff on the news where they're like, oh, these horse drugs, I'm like, well, in big dosages, but for the most part, they also give it to people to get rid of lice. So if your kids get lice, anybody had like kid that got lice? You don't remember that in school when they would come over and they do the lice test? Oh, you got lice in your beard? Oh, no. In your body hair right now. So the crazy part is if you got lice, they would like shampoo and then they would, ivermectin is in that. That's how they get rid of lice. So it also, so like the frontline doctors for COVID are actually using it in their protocols too.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story.
No, it's
That's a whole nother story, but they did, the organs were super important. They also, they cooked most of the other organs. They ate everything. They opened the bone. They were just sucking on bones all day, just getting like any bit of bone marrow out of there. They cooked the head. They cooked the head and then opened it, and we ate the brains. I mean, they're savages, man. They know what's up.
Well, what's crazy, if you see the Maasai, they're all like 6'7", 6'8", and they're all like this tall, and they're all super healthy, and because they eat a diet of meat, and then they drink this porridge made of cow's milk and blood. Mm-hmm. And so that's pretty much their diet. They eat meat and that. And then all of a sudden, though, they have a really cool or interesting study where they those guys are the hunters. When they retire the hunters and they become old, they basically move them out of the village and send them to another village, and then they feed them like grains. And then you know what happens? In 3 years, they're all dead. They all get obese and they die of heart attacks, the old people. So the minute they start hunting, they're like, you're no longer a hunter, now you get corn. And then they die. So there's a really interesting study looking at the Maasai when they retire the Maasai. They go from being these uber tall jack dudes that have a 20-inch vertical jump or a 40-inch straight leg vertical. And then they're like, okay, you're retired. We put you over in a hut and now you're done. So pretty well.
So with the vertical, I thought I had a good vertical. I jump with them, we do the dance with them, and I saw a video, and they were here, and I was like, it was a joke.
Yeah.
But also the interesting little tidbit, I forget the names, Kikusu tribe. There was some tribe that was right next to the Maasai, and they were more plant-based. And these tribes have been co-evolving for generations and generations. And the other tribe is 5'6", and just nowhere near the warriors that they were. And I always tell people, how do you think they got there? Oh, that's just their genetics. It's how do you think their genetics got that way?
Yeah.
Right? It's there's a great study too with height, and it was called 105 studies and the correlates of height to health or something, or male height. And they did a study, so as you go away from the equator, people got taller. right? It was very linear. So around the equator, they were shorter, and then as they go away, they're taller, like the Vikings, right, up north. And then they directly correlated. It's a very linear correlation. You can see all the graphs. It's just very linear with how much animal protein they consumed. And quality, they called it quality protein, and it was just animal eggs,
Well, think about it.
dairy.
If it's cold for 6 months out of the year and you live in like Norway, what do you have access to? Like the only green stuff you're getting is you're scrubbing out of the inside of an animal. So I mean, like but then if you go into the really cold parts of the country, and I know this because Matt Lalonde fucking lambasted me on this, why are the Inuits look chubby? Because it's cold all the time. So like if you get into a society where like, you're in Arctic temperatures all year round, like even though they eat the meat and they're pretty healthy, they all have to carry a ton of excess body fat just for warmth. So that's why like you go to the equator and everybody's super lean because an excess body fat doesn't help.
And the Inuit, they're shorter. They're the only exception to the rule with the North. And I think that's, people describe it too, because they have to, a circle is the most surface area for body, to trap the most body heat. You don't want to be super tall.
But yeah, if you look at like the countries where it's like cold for half the year and then that, like people are usually, pretty tall.
Yeah. And so then, I was saying with the genetics part, so it's like, why do you think that the genes develop this way? Like, why are Asian people generally shorter? Well, they're living off, people are saying, but they eat rice and they're just plant-based and this. Like, well, it didn't turn out very well. If you're looking at like their height and their, Well,
there's also a region in China that has some of the tallest people. Have you like Mao Ying, where he's from? There's a region in China where like all the people are like 6'10" and above. And they are predominantly meat eaters.
They eat meat. And Hong Kong is the longest lived population, and they're also the highest meat eating population in the world. So they have both right now. As of now, they have both records, which is a nice little correlation.
So you got to go see the Maasai, you got to go to Africa. Where else have you been?
Canada, we've been to some farms and ranches in Canada. We've been to Joel Salatin, people have heard of him probably.
Yeah, Polyface Farms.
Polyface. We went all over California, Texas. Nothing too exotic.
Other than
Africa, yeah.
So what was the mission? Like, when you sat down and you were to put a stake in the ground and say, hey, what's the mission statement for this documentary? Like, what am I hoping to see and what's the information I'm going to collect and what's the argument that I'm trying to make?
Well, the question is, what should humans eat? And that's kind of what everyone wants to know. It's so confusing. Nutrition is so conflicting.
Why is that?
How long do you have?
Well, what do you guys think?
There's conflicts of interest.
Is it just financial? Is it that cui bono, who benefits? That if you think about it, and I don't like, you guys know I hate tinfoil hats. I don't like conspiracies. But if you think about it, I think I was telling him I had an opportunity to go speak at a conference on national security up in Pennsylvania. So I got invited to the War College, and there's a bitchin' deal. So I was sitting in a group, and one of the doctors that was the other invited guest, who was orders of magnitude smarter than me, like PhD from like India, just really sharp dude. He made an interesting point, which is funny when you hear somebody of that, like, we're a bunch of fucking knuckle draggers. Like, I build shit in my shop, and my wife probably is like, these fucking idiots. But like, this dude's legitimately smart, like PhD, MD from India, and then like comes and like basically this, Brandeis gave him his own, own part of the college, like you run this part. But he made an interesting point where he's like, who benefits by like let's say diet and like misconstruing diet and exercise, who benefits in that one? And he's like, the drug companies do. And he's like, you got to remember, the part that I presented on was the largest threat to national security is the lack of physical fitness for kids that are going to be of military age. So less than 25% of the United States, 16 to 18 years old, is fit enough to basically join the US military, which has awfully terrible reduced standards, right? And then the other piece is the idea of like a threat. Like, let's say, Red Dawn theory happens, right? And we see Russian parachuters coming out of the sky. How many Americans of like adult age are fit enough for like the calling out of the militia? And we were talking about that I was on a podcast recently talking about that. And that was even scarier because it's less than 10%. So less than 10% of adults somewhere between the age of 25 and 45 are fit enough to like fight hand-to-hand combat or like hike over a mountain, carry shit. It's absolutely insane. And so this doctor, his piece was based on the largest threat to national security is the U.S. dependent on pharmaceuticals not produced in the United States. What percentage of drugs do you think are produced outside the United States? 70% are produced in India alone. And the U.S. has the largest pharmaceutical dependence of any other country in the world. So like that was his threat, was like, well, what if they just the ships stop coming, we stop shipping it? Like, what are people gonna do? Yeah, so like it was really, really eye-opening because I was like, wow, these are really smart people talking about really big conspiracy thoughts. But, you know, for what Brian said, like who benefits by confusing people on diet? You know, I mean, it's really interesting too. Like, did you guys read Jason Fung's book on the insulin paradox, where he was like, it's not your fault, it's insulin. And like, you know, like at the end of the day, most people overeat. I mean, that's really the biggest deal. Like, you know, if you guys are Layne Norton fans, calories in, calories out. Now, the problem with that is that the food industry has taken really, really sharp people, like incredibly smart food scientists, and chemically designed the food to be hyper palatable to where it's like walking into a casino in Vegas. Anybody ever been to a casino in Vegas and not wanted to gamble? Yeah, I'll tell you, the three guys up here speaking, like so impactful. I have the gene where I have no addiction, where if you were I took painkillers for that, and like all of a sudden the third day I'm like, I don't want to take these anymore. Even it hurts, but I'm fine. So but I walk into a Vegas casino and I'm like, where is the craps table? I don't know. I've never wanted to gamble, but this place makes me want to shoot craps, right? Like the same thing with food. Like there's a deal with Doritos. Like Doritos are so highly addictive. They like put there's an entire study based on it. There's a book about the level of addiction and all the chemicals that it releases in the body when you have that Dorito. Nobody eats one Dorito, and that's by design. So you can say calories in, calories out, which of course makes sense, a law of thermodynamics. But at the end of the day, if the food is so hyper palatable that like it's cranking up our most primal basic instinct to want to fucking consume it, like, okay, yeah, everybody overeats, but like at some point you got to at least cut us a break, right? The one thing that's not overly, and I think what he was getting into and what I was gonna, you guys know I'm long on the segments. We were talking about like the difference between processed, like why are some foods healthier processed and others aren't? And you guys have heard me say this for shit over a decade, like one ingredient, like the most basic food, like, I mean, try to overeat on steak. Let's fucking go. Like we go to like Fogo de Chao and what happens? You're like 3 pounds later, you're like, you're sweating, you feel sick, you go home, you get up the next morning and you're like, I just lost 3 pounds. This is amazing. Right? All of a sudden you go and you're like, you go to like a Italian restaurant, you eat all that pasta and you're like, I think I'm gonna puke. And then the next day you're like, I gained 10 pounds. I mean, so it's like there's a really interesting and like, it's not as simple as just calories in, calories out. And it is, I mean, if like, years ago we had to do it on the podcast, it's like, hey, if you can balance a spreadsheet, you can get anybody in shape. And it's true. Paul Carter, who's here, is fucking a wizard in terms of getting people in shape. And it's about, balancing macros and like making sure that their calories are in, deficiency and training the deficiency. And there's a whole thing where, you got to be hungry. But for the most part, in this time, like people don't understand that idea. They don't understand that to like truly get shredded, you got to be close to death and really fucking hungry. And most people aren't willing to go there. So the idea of like picking foods that are both satiating, but you necessarily can't overeat. Like I've never, and I always love Paul's line, like, what is it, Paul? Nobody ever got sent to fat camp for eating too much broccoli? Yeah. Before I ever knew Paul, I saw that quote and I was like, fuck yeah, this dude is fucking perfect, right? But, and it's because people are like arguing with you, you're like, well, how many carbs are in the broccoli? And you're like, bro, the broccoli's not your problem. Right. Eat as much fucking broccoli as you want. Yeah, it just doesn't exist. But the problem is that if you can steer away from these, like, and you guys know what these foods are. If you go to the supermarket and you walk by, they catch your eye and you're like, I don't even know what those are, but those look good. And I know this because I make the mistake of taking my kids to the grocery store. And I push the cart and I see what like their eyes go to. And they're like, what is that? And I'm like, what is that? And they bring it over, can we get this? What do I say? No. Go ask your mother. And then she's like, my wife will go over there, and she's like, why do you keep sending them over to me? Because I don't want to say no all the time. I'm like, but it's because like we are, the American population is not well armed to deal with this. So you guys as agents of change and being hopefully they're, pipelined, away from insanity is like, hey, like, let's look at this thing. I mean, Chris's story of being, what were you, 5 foot, 410 pounds? 5'7", 410. I like can't even imagine.
I'm really glad you can't.
No, I mean, and you're like, I started feeling better a lot. Yeah, no shit. I mean, like the G forces, but like, there's a situation where like, you didn't, you grew up in a pretty rural, like, disadvantaged kind of financial situation. So like, it's not like, well, it's like, you go to Samoa or those islands and the real fat people are the rich people because they can have food. Like you have food that is so hyper palatable and so calorically dense that's so cheap that, it's like the one thing I blow away is in Orange County, they, because the weather's so nice, there are a lot of homeless people. They're all super obese. And I'm like, how come the homeless people are so fat? Right? Because people throw away a lot of good food and they're going to fucking crush it. Yeah, it's really high. And it's like, why? So obviously it's not because you're poor, you don't have food to eat. It's because that the food that's so cheap is so hyper palatable, and that's the shit that packs on. And that's where I think what we forget all too often is we are advanced beings. So like we are in this like hardware where our hardware is fucking sending us to the moon, but our software is probably 40,000 years out of date. We are like, at the end of the day, we are like within our own most primal, basic, like, if we went back in time in a time machine, which I'm sure Rudy Reyes will show up in any minute. For those of you guys that were at the symposium with Rudy, there's a real situation that if we went back in time with Rudy and they dropped us in there, like the individuals probably look a lot like us and they're wired the exact same. So we're in a situation where like our software hasn't caught up with where hardware is. So for a lot of people, they're just like, yeah, I mean, it's easy for Lane Norton to be like, well, you eat too much. Well, yeah, no shit. But have you ever had a fucking Dorito? Like, I can't eat one bag. Like, there's a reason. And like pizza and all the other shit, like all that stuff tastes phenomenal. Like I tell people all the time, I'm like, there were pizza places in Philly, like I can still drive you to blindfolded. But at the end of the day, I know like, cheesesteaks and pizza, not healthy food to eat. You're gonna look like shit. You're gonna look like a cheesesteak. So I think in the segment I was trying to get to, for processed foods and all that.
Oh yeah, well this is my favorite topic really. And I did a podcast with Lane Norton a long time ago. And we had this debate and I stumped him a few times. It was pretty funny. But we're still in this like low key war. But
well, you don't have a PhD, so therefore nothing you say is of value.
Okay. So I can't start.
It's okay. This is a safe space.
This is my favorite topic because anyone can make a diet on paper that can be any amount of calories. Anyone can do that. But can you stick to it? Can the client stick to it? It is meaningless to make a calorie deficit diet on paper and then what the reality of it. Yeah, someone could stick to it and they'd be white knuckling it and starving and about to die. But my whole thing is how do you make something that someone can stick to and enjoy and still be in a calorie deficit? So this is my argument with him, and I have imaginary arguments with him a lot, actually. It's kind of funny.
You're laying in bed being like, I'll get you Lane Norton.
And I have this point, I'm like, this point is so good. And people call him out in my posts all the time. It's kind of funny. He never responds. They just put like clown, bio Lane, and he never responds. But it's about satiety. So it's about protein and processing. So these are my two things. So all the things you're talking about, like hyperpalatability, and the reason now that this is the only time in history people are both malnourished and obese at the same time, which should be a wake-up call, is because of the protein and the processing. Okay, so why is food, other than the fact that you're adding 34 flavors to Doritos to make you addicted to them, but why are Doritos bad? Why is pizza bad? And when you look at it, it's because of the amount of protein and the processing that's done. So has anyone heard of Dr. Ted Naiman? He's like a doctor on Twitter. He's great. His thing is the protein to energy ratio. And this is everything to me. And it fits in with the protein and the processing. So if you look at any food, and want to know if it's good or bad, you look at the protein to energy ratio. So pizza has a terrible protein to energy ratio. You have some cheese and some pepperoni. That's not a lot of protein.
I don't need this negativity in my life. No, I'm kidding with you.
So
when you say like
protein to energy,
protein to total
energy,
calories.
Energy is fat or carbs. So pizza, maybe there's like 10 grams of protein.
But there's 2,000 calories.
Yes. So per slice, or it's like you're getting like 100 grams of protein for 2,000 calories, or like probably like 60 grams of protein per 2,000 calories. That's terrible. And so you could go into all these ways of why Doritos are bad or why processed food is bad, but I think at the core of it, it's because it has a low protein to energy ratio.
Well, what if we took the Doritos, crushed them up, and then rolled them in steak? What about that one?
I mean, that wouldn't be bad.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. What's the
Okay.
beef to Dorito ratio?
So there's like a graph, like an X, Y axis. So like down at the bottom is sugar, flour, oil, the worst 3 ingredients you can eat. At the top is pure whey protein, that's 100% protein. And what really, it's like everyone eats on a spread. So every food is on a spectrum, and everyone's diet is the average of the foods they eat. Okay, so if you just get it right in the middle, it's kind of like equilibrium, it's balanced, and you'll kind of have weight maintenance. So the idea is everyone, but most people are down here, they're low. So what the processed foods, think of processed foods like the chips and like hot dog with a bun and the pizza and the soda, French fries, all that stuff, it's bad for other reasons, but I think it's mainly bad because it's mostly energy and not enough protein. Protein has so many benefits. It's not even like a calorie. I don't think we should include protein in calories. Like it has a higher thermic effect. So the TEF is a thermic effect of food. So just by eating protein, you're burning more calories just digesting it. There's so many advantages to protein and satiety filling you up. So most people are down here on their protein to energy ratio when you look at their diet over the course of a month, just arbitrary amount of time. All we're saying is move up that ratio. So when people ask me, I play beach volleyball, stuff like that, random people I meet, right? They're not in the nutrition world, they don't know anything. They're like, what do I do? I hear you're, doing a podcast, making a movie, all that. I'm like, cut your processed foods and just replace it with meat. That's it. So it's like you're adding more, that's bumping up your protein to energy ratio. All the processed foods are just diluted of protein because protein is the most expensive, it's the least shelf stable, and so all processed foods are just stuffed with the cheapest ingredients, which are just pure energy that your body, and also it's the refined energy. That's where the processing component comes in, is the farther down you process a food, well, mainly carbohydrates really, the farther down you process them, the worse they interact with your body and your gut hormones and insulin. Back to Jason Fung is, higher glycemic index and all that type of stuff. So the level of processing matters.
His insulin paradox was pretty much disproven. So, yeah, and he still beats that drum, which is crazy. He won't back off on it. The secret sauce for anything is actually fat and sugar. So like cake frosting.
Combo.
Anybody not like cake frosting?
Or a donut.
Right,
Use a donut. Use a donut because everyone likes a donut.
So I'm not a donut fan. I'd like the CrossFit community like fucking obsessed about donuts, and I'm like, I was never a donut guy. But like you think about, you take dough and you deep fry it, right, with sugar. So you're basically like creating like the ultimate trifecta for that. So that's true. So there's a donut shop in Newport Beach called Sycar Donuts that like makes these like the most decadent donuts. My kids, whenever I'm like, hey, so like, do you guys want to like go see grandma? Yes, because they want to go to Sycar Donuts. We didn't see grandma for like a year, and I'm like, you want to see grandma? And they're like, can we go to Sycar Donuts? I'm like, you guys are 5. How did you remember this? Right? Like it imprints in their mind. I'm like, what about that steak place? They're like, what? No, donuts. So, but if you think about it, like the most hyper palatable is like you think about is frosting, right? You take lard and you mix it with sugar, and you cover a cake with that. Like that's for a 5-year-old, that's pretty good. I mean, for us too, it's pretty great. But the idea is that like a calorie is just a unit of measurement, right? And the age-old like, well, a calorie is a calorie. Not really. When like let's say I get 200 calories from eating red meat versus 200 calories from eating frosting. Like, and I think the age-old idea of like, hey, you just got to eat less. I always go back to, I think it was something Paul told me about John Meadows when he was dieting for his contest, and he like want to eat like froyo for every day. And didn't you tell me that he was doing his contest, but he wanted that, was it a Snickers or froyo or something he wanted to add into his diet?
Yeah. John had been on a streak of winning shows, and he was really meticulous. And he changed his post-workout carbs just to frozen yogurt. We counted for calories. But he won the show, and he still won the show, but he got pitched out by like his coach because his conditioning wasn't as good as it had previously been. And I think that's kind of a massive misconception, especially when it comes to those kind of those small amounts of recruits. You don't necessarily see them if you're just trying to lose 10 pounds or something. But when you're inside out peeled and you're using nothing but whole food sources consistently, and then you start substituting for processed foods, there's some different things that happen in the body, like inflammation and things like that, and you're going to be stuck in stage and have a little bit different look. And I know I've heard other flexible dieting gurus talk about how, I think it was Lane Gordon talk about how he ate ice cream every night, going into one show. I'm like, okay, but you probably would look fucking better had you not eaten
Yeah.
ice cream.
Yeah. Or you're a lot hungrier. He made it a lot harder for himself.
Well, so when I was playing early in my NFL career, I would train with these bodybuilders, and they trained at the gym. These dudes were really big, really strong, took a lot of drugs, which was cool because we could train and just try to smash them. But the interesting thing was like they would, like try to pack on all this weight, and then all of a sudden they like picked a contest, and they were like, hey, I got like 16 weeks to this contest. All of a sudden they like completely changed their diets. And it was like, they had like the Tupperware, and it was like this. And I was like, whoa, you guys were like drinking shakes. Like, what the hell happened? And they're like, no, you can't get ripped on that stuff. You got to eat real food. Like, that's like that's a pretty known thing that when you're trying to get in the best shape of your life, you got to eat like real food. You got to eat as much as you can. So like, whereas we can eat less with like super calorically dense food, now like, it was like, 12 chicken breasts and this. And, it was, one guy was real high carb, high protein, low fat. And that's how he reacted and did real well. The other guy was like lower carb, higher fat, higher protein. And both these dudes were, not professional stepping on stage, but, winning a lot of local shows trying to be pros. And it was just really interesting of like, well, he seems to do well on more carbs. I don't do as well on carbs. So, I mean, it's pretty interesting, but at the end of the day, those guys were like, it was all real food. Like there was no supplements, no shakes, no processed, everything was made. And it was interesting to see the flip from like, okay, we're doing this show, to all of a sudden, hey, this is what they look like in contest shape. And they hit their mark 16 weeks later and were fucking peeled out. So that was always interesting for me. And I was like, okay, so real foods, Vince Gironda's Stone Age diet, which we've talked about, Old Man Zangus, nobody got, strong lift eating from a vending machine type of shit. So, I mean, all that really has roots, and we know this. People have been saying this for years and years and years. And the problem is that people just get soaked with the media. And I think a disinformation campaign is most effective when you don't know what to believe. So like, when you think about like, you hear disinformation campaigns and communists and all, you hear all this fucking tinfoil hat stuff. But at the end of the day, the goal of a disinformation campaign isn't to sell you the wrong information. It's effectively to put out so many conflicting views that you as an individual don't know what to believe.
That's why the fat acceptance movement exists. I figured it out. The fat acceptance movement exists because of the confusion and disinformation campaigns, that it's so backwards that people have given up, and people who are obese, they're saying, I've tried it, I've done the diets. Yeah. And I said, no, you've done the wrong diets, you've had the wrong information, so you're at a loss, you say you tried it, and then I understand why they want to move to just accept me because I'm fat, because I've tried everything. But you get it, right? Yeah. They just have the wrong information.
Well, I think eventually people get to the point where they're like, I can't do it. There's a reason that pro-level bodybuilders have bodybuilding coaches. It's a reason that the strongest dudes in the world have coaches. Like, I think everybody has to have a coach. You got to have somebody you can reach out to that's like, am I crazy? No, you're right on track. And I think like, mentorship, like I've talked about earlier today, is like we have this group, you have this, Power Athlete Block 1 network, we have professional development, you have people to reach out. I mean, that's the piece where you're like, and I constantly call my brother and I'll like ask him a question. And so my brother's always kind of been my mentor and my coach. And I always hit him up and be like, am I fucked up? And he'll be like, no, you're not fucked up. Like, and we always kind of start from there. And he'll hit me up and be like, you want to hear some really fucked? So my brother's a defense attorney. He does all the nasty like felony murder stuff. So he'll call me and be like, I got some real doozies for you. And but I think a big part of this is that people don't know necessarily where to turn. And the problem is that their heroes are spinning them false information and false expectations and not being honest with them. Being like, like the favorite one, and I learned this when we did our 22 Jack Street thing and like did our fucking body composition thing. I was hungry for like weeks, like to the point where I was like, if I walk in the fridge, I'm gonna eat everything. I'm just gonna sit over here. I'm not even gonna go in that fridge. And it was like, you gotta be hungry. And I don't know how to get shredded without getting hungry. People are like, oh, I've never felt hungry and I'm fucking 4% body fat. I'm like, no, it doesn't exist like that.
Well, I want to jump in because your protein and high fat and high carb and the bodybuilding example and the whole food stuff you're saying just completely proves my point. It's protein and processing, and then the high carb guy and the high fat guy, those are just both sides of the same coin. Yeah. So that's just the protein to energy ratio. So they're both doing a high protein diet with trying to get to a lower energy.
Over the years, I've looked at a million different diets, and the only one that I never saw work for getting somebody really strong and in good shape was a low protein diet. Paul, have you ever seen anybody go into a bodybuilding show shredded on a low protein diet?
I don't even know anybody would necessarily do that.
Yeah, I don't know if they would. Like, it just doesn't exist. So when you hear people that are like, oh, I'm eating, or you see the thing come out and they're like, well, the average American should be consuming 25 grams of protein. And I'm like, who, what, America? Like, nobody I know. If somebody came over and was like, I only eat 25 grams, I'd be like, fucking get out. So it's like, I know a lot of this is repeat because you guys listen to the podcast and you guys are super dialed and we've been on this journey for a long time. So it's always good to get in there and laugh and take some cuts. But I was happy that Brian could jump over. He's local to us and come and chop it up with you guys. So he's going to be here. We're going to end. Now, it's not ending. We're just going to take a little break and then we're going to rally and I'm going to meet you guys over. He's going to come to the bar and hear some live music and we're going to hang out. So anything else, amigo?
No, man. I just, you're talking about bodybuilding, right? And then the protein stuff. And that's, of course, everyone knows that in your guys' world. I just think everyone needs to know that, right?
Yeah.
We need to spread this to everyone or get to all your clients, get to your
It starts
friends.
here.
Yeah. Because everyone can eat a high protein energy ratio diet and you'll benefit. So.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys.